Hi there, this is Doug Brunke with Global Chamber, reporting from Scottsdale, Arizona, our global headquarters. Really appreciate everybody dialing in from around the world. This is part of what we call Globinars that we do at least twice a month that are intended to have our members explain their expertise so that other members are able to benefit from those. So we have some really great speakers today to talk about cross-cultural issues, good and bad, hopefully give you some information as either an exporter or importer to be able to be more successful. Our next event is on the 30th, and then in February we already have 2 events scheduled, including one on women in global leadership, which is going to be a theme all the way through 2018. So we encourage you to get involved and to watch those and to be part of your local chapter as well. Each local chapter has their own local events in addition to these Globinars. I would like to start out with a little bit of an introduction, and I'll introduce our 3 speakers today, Miguel Trejo, Jill Bishop, and Tim Hunt, who will be our subject matter experts. We were talking a little bit, or I heard the audience here talking about 30 years ago dating themselves. Is that what you were thinking? 30 years would date yourself? I've been doing global business for 37 years, and so I am definitely dating myself. And I've seen some, in terms of cross-cultural experiences, I've seen some really great things, and I've seen some really horrible things. And unfortunately, as I was thinking about the past, the horrible things were the ones that stood out. Those were the ones I could really think of. So I really worked hard to try to think about some good things that have occurred and what and why those things were good. And so for expert speakers, I'd like to just mention a few things, and if you could touch on some of these during your presentations, that would be awesome. So number one, first and foremost, and certainly one of the obvious things around localization and cross-cultural communication are basic marketing materials and website and making sure that the local language and images and tone, all of those things are important. And certainly thinking about something that I'd seen on a bad side, a company had shown me some business cards. They were actually headed to China, Trevor, and they had done all of the translation of their card on Google, and they had shown me what the card was, and my rudimentary Chinese was like, this is going to be bad, so let's get a professional. So definitely we're going to be talking to professionals today. Don't go it alone. Don't use, even though Google is getting better and and the technology is getting better around translation, the subtleties of the language still were many years away from getting things like that to be done. Another area of cross-cultural type issue other than language are meetings and tone of meetings and pace of meetings. I've lived in Asia multiple times, and one of the things I think those of us that have worked in Asia have noticed that many of the Asian cultures value silence. And very often Europeans and Americans don't. We fill in the space, right? So if we're doing cross-cultural, whether you're in a negotiation or you're in a meeting like this around the world, the Asians still to this day, even though it was obvious to me 30 years ago, still to this day have a harder time interjecting thoughts. And so these kinds of cultural issues are really important when you're talking to each other, whether it's your marketing or more appropriately when you're doing business on a day-to-day basis, to really take the time to listen to your partners and recognize that they're approaching the conversation more than likely in a very different way than you are. Disagreements and how disagreements are handled. If you've ever been in a disagreement with a Korean vendor, it gets a little heated, and I think I saw it was on 60 Minutes this week where I think an American had gone over to look at North Korea's nuclear arsenal, if you will, and they got into an argument apparently, and he talked about how they were slamming the table, and there are certain cultures that allow that, and there's certainly other cultures that don't, and in the United States, I had worked for DuPont, which is pretty well-run company, and the people are a relatively narrow standard deviation, but those of us that have done work in small companies, SMEs, know that sometimes those people, even within a culture, can be a little bit different. I had worked with a company here in the US that run by two brothers, where the two brothers argued, and one time they one threw something at the other, so I don't think I've ever seen that in Korea, where like they were throwing things at each other. But these are things that happen in real life, and certainly they happen probably in your house. And if you've worked at a company like DuPont, you probably had never seen anything like that. But if you work with small and medium-sized businesses, whether they're here or maybe in some other countries, you can see some things that can be a little bit unsettling and certainly different from your experience. So just be aware that those things happen. Giving feedback in business can be very different across cultures as well. Many cultures don't really want to be in a big room having feedback that might be negative to one individual person. And so just be aware that if you do have feedback, Americans tend to be very, forthright, and, it's like, don't worry, here's your feedback, and plus minus. And, in some cultures, that's going to be a really significant problem. Hierarchy and respect is clearly another big issue in a lot of cultures. Some cultures much more so, where hierarchy and title are really important, whereas here in the U.S. it tends to not be the case, although in some corporate cultures it is, but in general we're pretty unhierarchical. Brainstorming, thinking, and Americans tend to be just kind of throw stuff out there, whereas the Finns, as an example, are somewhat put off by just thoughts, because thoughts can be undeveloped, and if they're undeveloped, that means they might think you're stupid, by just saying some things that actually might not be that great. So these are some of the things that are way beyond language in terms of things that we see across cultures. Rules and relationships is another area of differentiation across cultures. Someone in Switzerland, as an example, the classic example is, two brothers in Switzerland, and one finds out the other cheated on their taxes. If that happens in Switzerland, the one brother might actually report the other brother to the tax authorities because they cheated on the taxes. And yet, in other cultures, that would never happen because they're family. And so the family bond becomes first. And I don't know about you, but very often I've heard people see things like that and think people are unethical because of that approach, because of their cultural, and that might unethical on a certain scale, but it's certainly ethics should be viewed through a cultural filter, and hopefully we're able to talk through that today. Religion becomes an important thing around the world. I had an example where Heineken gave at a World Cup, they put the flags of countries all over the world on their beer, and one of the flags actually had some Islamic writing on it, and because alcohol is not allowed there, it was quite offensive, to many folks. I know I've personally been involved in some newsletter type issues regarding, that something like a picture around a swimming pool in Europe might look just fine, but if you're sending that to certain countries, that's going to be completely unacceptable. So some of that's pretty obvious, but there's a lot of gray area there in terms of like, where is the line on some of these things, and those things really need to be thought of. So that's a little bit of a framework as we start. And so I'd like to go to Miguel Trejo. Miguel, you're going to be talking through your Total Talent Inc. Appreciate you speaking today, and we look forward to hearing more about your cut of cross-cultural communication.
Well, thank you very much, Doug, and I'm very impressed with your introduction, covering several critical issues in cross-cultural communication. First of all, I have to say that I love I love speaking about the cross-cultural communication because I have worked and lived in several parts of the world. And for the audience, I just, for myself, I have an accent, and sometimes I tend to speak quite fast. Please let me know if I make those mistakes when I'm introducing my subject. The first one, to get everybody into the same page about cross-cultural communication, I would like to present a video, and I'm going to ask Cesar to put it on to start my presentation.
It's a big world, full of difference and diversity. How you see others is influenced by your own cultural perspective, and how others see you is influenced by their cultural perspective. What happens when you speak? Do people from other cultures understand you in the way you intended? And what happens with different cultures in the workplace? How rigid or flexible is their approach to rules? Is formal or informal behavior expected? And how do different cultures approach timekeeping? In today's global business environment, it is essential to learn how to navigate across different cultural landscapes. You need a good set of tools to do this. You need an understanding of how different cultures trade and do business, an insight into how different cultures communicate, and a clear idea of how different cultures manage people. To be a savvy global traveller, you need to be willing to undertake the journey of understanding other cultures. Develop cultural intelligence so you can communicate confidently across cultures.
Okay. Thank you, Cesar. Can we move to the next chart? For the first one. It is my belief that cross-cultural communication is not only about globalization of the business. I think it's the first, yes, it's after the video, there is a, that's right. Okay, thank you very much. It's not only about the globalization of the business as a whole, because as of today, is with the technology, internet, and social media, we're getting closer and closer and closer to different cultures with a different background, with a different language. And it is important to create an awareness of that we have to be sensitive to those differences. Other than that, we may get into a conflict very easy and create a barrier that may affect our business or the purpose of the business or the purpose of the communication that we have. And in the cross-cultural communication involves an understanding of how people from different cultures speaks. And this is a two-way street, or three-way street, or four-way street. All depends where we are dealing with. If we are dealing with in Vietnam, we are dealing in Cambodia, or we're dealing in Russia and in Germany, or in Japan. Each one of the contexts is different when we are dealing with those organizations. As of today, we are used to think about the U.S. corporation moving abroad, having the subsidiaries, introducing corporate guidelines, and manage an entire business. But at the same time today, we are getting the same effect in the United States. We have global organizations with presence in the United States. So it's the global effect, the country effect, the community, the workplace, and the family. Can we move to the next one? From a global standpoint, I just wanted to put a perspective of how global the world is becoming. When you look at this map, only the countries in gray they don't have, as of the end of 2016, a multinational organization. That means that 75 of the world, they are hosting or having an international presence or a global or multinational organization. Let me get deeper in those figures so we have a perspective of how this globalization is impacting the world from a cultural standpoint and from a financial standpoint. Cesar? In the US, we have 540 global companies. In Europe, the United Europe, we have 342. Japan, which is a very small country, we have 219. In China, 200. India, 56. Australia, Russia, Brazil, and Mexico, among others. Those companies are accountable for 80% of the world, of the global world, and they produce 30% of the global GDP. In total, we are talking about 43,000 transnational companies with a presence of 63 plus countries. That means that these organizations are shaping up the culture of the global environment in business, and are shaping up the financial of this business. And you can imagine how many employees and how many employment they produce. Just to give you an example, Walmart, which is the #1 global organization, they have about 2.5 million employees around the world. And that tells you the magnitude, how they impact, and how they have created that cultural sensitivity within the organization to be successful abroad. And not only that, they are bringing in employees to be trained in the US and then send it back to the country of origin, with the purpose of creating a more understanding and finding the synergies within those with the cultural differences. Cesar, the next one. In the United States, we just think about the United States. This is a global economy. We have a global environment here in the United States. We have 350 languages spoken in the US. To give an example, in New York, we have 182, LA 185, Chicago 153, Houston 145, Washington 168, and on and on and on and on. That means that we are currently living in a global environment, in a multicultural environment. I'm going to give you an example of one of our clients. Our client is Dell Tile. They produce the tile for the houses, building, offices. They used to be a U.S. organization, and they were acquired by an Italian business. Now, in that plant, sitting here in Texas, we have employees from India. We have employees from Nepal. We have Hispanics from Mexico, not from other countries. We have Burmese as well. They have more than 15 different languages there. And the management is Italian, and the plant manager is from South Africa. So in this microcosmos, we see how important is a cross-cultural communication just to be effective, to be aligned in this organization. And we were retained to maximize the synergy of that background differences. We were retained to create an environment where they can understand better between the different cultures, and how to maximize the contribution of that different background. And this is sitting here in Dallas. When you put it in a different scale, think about American Airlines, in the pricing department, in the technology department, with all those employees coming from where? From India, from Pakistan, from China. We are creating a subculture within our culture that we call it today intercultural environment. And we, as an organization, as a business leader, have to be able to create that environment that maximizes those differences and produce an effective organization. The next one, Cesar. With globalization, moving people, data, and goods, we are looking for business opportunities, moving abroad. Yeah. I think business opportunities of companies coming in the United States, trying to adapt not only to the language, but different legal processes, different ways of doing business, different ways to communicate. Job opportunities, everybody wants to find a job opportunity. Improves the contribution employees in a diverse workforce. How can we get that done if we don't have a communication that is effective across the different backgrounds, across the different cultures? Very difficult. We had to create an environment where the people feel free to share their views and ideas. We have to maximize the talent that is available, sometimes that is hidden. And we have to get an understanding of a diverse market. When we look at the United States, we're not talking about one single market. We're talking about different markets. The preference from a consumer standpoint may be different in Florida than in Washington State. Maybe different in California than in New York, and we all know that. So we have to get an understanding of the difference of different consumers and different preferences in each one of the markets. Okay, Cesar? What are the factors that can affect the results? When we move abroad, the different business customs, procedure, processes, politics, government agents, and people in the other side. The beliefs and communication strategy. Maybe what I think is right is not exactly right in a different culture. Perhaps my tone, my body language is not well accepted could be not well accepted in Asia Pacific, but it might be perfectly right just to do business in Germany. And the language differences. When you are in Cambodia and you are speaking English, in the other side, you have a very attentive person paying attention of what you are saying. Not because they are not understanding, they really want to understand and they are preparing an answer. And you have to wait a couple of seconds until you hear that answer from that people. That means that the awareness comes from us. The responsibility is on us. The moment we create an intercultural environment, we create accountability in both sides. But until that, the responsibility lies on us. Okay, Cesar? I think I've been covering the intercultural communication, which is a dynamic that is happening within an organization where they move abroad. Today, Skype or any way to have a communication with technology, we have people from all over the world. We have a design team in one part of the world. We have the execution team in a different part of the world. And it's very important to have those processes and that cultural sensitivity in that organization. Let me give you an example. For instance, when I was working for Seagram, who used to be the number 1 or number 2 wine and spirit company in the world, I was called to go to New York. And I went to New York, and without no information, I knew that it was a critical project. And then we were in the room, people from all over the world, from the company. And they were explaining that the company had just acquired Martel globally. And with that came the challenge of introduce or create or to expand the Seagram's culture into those businesses. And we were tasked to develop a process to integrate those new organizations within our regions into the culture of of seagrams. And there were some principles. One of them is that English has to be the language, the first thing. Secondly, the standard reporting system has to be the process to follow. And third, the people process has to be localized in each one of the countries. And fourth, we have to identify the talent and retain the talent in the other side. And five, we have to identify those cultural dimensions that were making successful those organizations. With those 5 pillars, we created a master plan. And we went back and put in place the integration process. But it was critical to understand the cultural differences, to communicate, and introduce some basic elements that would cut across the different geographies, not in my region, but across the world. And that's an example of how effective is the planning when you consider, when you take into consideration culture as a critical element when you are in the process of integrating and acquiring businesses. Okay, Cesar. And then, as of today, when a company, I used to work with Grams, Quaker Oats, Kellogg's, with Mission Foods, that we globalize Mission Foods. When we run on a business assessment, was not only the commercial risk, the control risk, and the currency fluctuation. We added an element that is the cross-cultural risk. What if the product is not well accepted? What if we are not able to understand the consumer in the other side? What are the challenges in terms of communication? What are the challenges in terms of marketing? What can we use in the point of sales? The promotions, the product, the tasting, all of that is part of it. It's not only a part of the product, but it's part of the culture and the cultural differences. So we put together a team, and that we call it the steering committee, and each one of us were responsible for a piece of the business. I was responsible for the people systems, finance for all the financial reporting and metrics, and supply chains and marketing. And all of us had to go there and gain understanding and bring it back to corporate and say, this is our findings. And this is the talent that we found in that organization, and those are the cultural dimensions that are critical to preserve. Cultural dimensions and people are very critical to the success of any venture outside of your home country. Okay, Cesar. What is the cultural risk? The cultural risk is when we due to our miscommunication, we put at stake, we put at risk some human value, and we challenge those human values on the other side. And that we can affect the business. We can affect the value chain operations, so that the product, the services, the designs, the marketing of the sales. We have to create a sense of belonging, the new belonging from the other culture. They have to feel welcome to the new organization. And if somebody would ask me, Miguel, when did you start the integration of the cultural integration? We started the cultural integration the moment we communicate the acquisition of that business or the introduction of that business in the other side. Okay, Cesar? And just as a framework, we have three well-known classifications in the cross-cultural risk. One of them is the ethnocentric orientation, when we see the world only through our own lenses. The polycentric is when it's a country base that is challenging us. An example is a typical joint venture. When we have a joint venture in another country, that joint venture, the local partners are going to preserve their culture, their values, and they're going to try to create a gap between corporate and the joint venture. And this sometimes create a major disruption on the business and affect the business there. And geocentric orientation is what we would like to have in the ideal world. Somebody, a leader who understands the global market without the boundaries, but with respect of the local cultures. The purpose of is to create a synergy between people, avoid the problems from misinterpretation, and create an effectiveness in a cross-cultural communication. Okay. Next. And this is a chart that you can review at your leisure. They how to improve your communication across cultures. One is overcome ethnocentric, recognize cultural variation, and create a culture of understanding and inclusiveness of different backgrounds. And we have several tactics like widen and speak clearly, listen carefully, study another language, and all of that. But all those elements, they play a role in an effective communication across culture. Okay, next one. And if we don't that effectively, or if we do that effectively, certainly we are going to affect positively or negatively development products and services. And as Doc said in his introduction, it's very important to understand the local meaning of the language in the marketing material, in the consumer messaging. Communicating and interacting with foreign business partners. Do they really make a decision in the meeting room or outside of the meeting room? They would like to have, first of all, one-on-one, and then the meeting, or the first the meeting, and then a one-on-one, or all the decisions are inside of the room and made outside of the room. Screening and selecting foreign distributors and other partners. What is the practice? Is more of an interpersonal relationship, or is it's purely business related? Negotiating and structuring international business ventures. How are those get done, and how to overcome the different challenges? Interacting with current and potential customers from abroad, preparing trade fairs and exhibitions, which is critical, and preparing advertising and promotional material. That could be affected positively or negatively if we have an effective cross-cultural communication. And I'm going to close my presentation saying that cross-cultural proficiency increases effectiveness of meetings and others encounters in international business, promotes harmonious work environment. To me, it's like creating an international and global network where each one of the people in that network, they have that responsibility of communicating effectiveness. Well, thank you very much. That's the information that I prepared for this session, and I hope that brought some value to the discussion.
Very good. Thank you, Miguel. Hang on there. We'll have some questions along the way. I encourage everybody around the world who's participating to ask questions in the chat area, and those of you in the various locations, Chicago, Salt Lake, and Metro Phoenix. I think those are the three locations that we have today. Come up to the screen and ask your question. So those of you here at headquarters, come on up and have the courage to ask a question one-on-one. So we'll have some questions after the session. Jill Bishop, you are the CEO of Multilingual Connections. I believe you're dialing in from Chicago, is it?
From Evanston, just across the border.
Okay, very good. Well, you're going to be sharing more about this important topic. We're looking forward to it.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm here with Anita Bender, who's our Business Development Manager. Can everyone hear? No, it sounded like there was an echo, but is the sound seems okay? Okay, echo is gone. Well, it's we're watching the snow swirl around outside our window. It's 19 degrees here in the Chicago area, so you all should be really thankful you are where you are. But we're really happy to be here and participate in this webinar, I think was the term. And I'm also very happy to follow Miguel. We specialize here in translation, and translation is just one component of cross-cultural and intercultural communication. And so it's nice to have the broader context first and then be able to dive in to translation. So Cesar, if you could move to the next slide, please. Jill Bishop, I'm somewhat of a non-traditional business owner. My doctorate is in linguistic anthropology, which looks at the intersection of language and culture. Most people don't grow up wanting to be linguistic anthropologists, nor can most of the world say it, but it's something that was always very interesting to me, looking at the intersection of language and culture, specifically in communities of dialects that are disappearing. So through a series of steps and decisions along the way, I ended up working for Chipotle Mexican Grill in charge of language and culture programs. And I realized through that there was a tremendous opportunity to work with organizations that weren't thinking about language and the importance of engaging both internal and external partners in communication. And so I started my business back in 2005. Originally, we focused on providing English and Spanish training for the workplace. From there, we developed a wide variety of translation services. And just 3 years ago, we stopped doing our language training in order to specialize in translation services. So right now our focus is, when I say translation services, it's document and website translation, audio and video transcription, multimedia services such as voiceover and subtitling, and interpretation services. There. So your international customers and your national customers, what do they want? Cesar, in most cases, they want content in their own language. English is increasingly widespread. Competence is growing tremendously. People are starting to learn English from young ages. But at the same time, people still prefer to buy products that are described in their own language. Common Sense Advisory is a research arm of the translation industry, and they have an article called Can't Read, Won't Buy. And they found that even among confident English speakers, 57% of people still want to buy a product that's described in their own language. In terms of repeat purchases, if post-sale support is in their language, they're 74% more likely to buy from you. So the case for translation is clear, but how do you get started? It can be really overwhelming for a lot of organizations. And so in some cases, you have to decide how to prioritize. You obviously can't translate everything at once, and you can't translate into every potential language. So how do you start? Do you dive in? Do you consider translating everything? Do you do all of your legal content, your web pages, your marketing materials, your product information? Or do you take more of a staged approach? Do you think about some select content? What is that key legal content that is non-negotiable? What is that marketing material? It could be 2 main pages of your website, but thinking critically about focusing in on a couple of areas where you think you can have the most impact often makes the most sense for organizations that are doing work internationally or targeting a multilingual local market. Instead of starting with everything, oh, hold on one second. Can you go back, Cesar? So you can start with the highest potential languages, evaluate your returns on those languages and on those pages, and then decide to reinvest and do more within one language or expand to additional languages. But first, you have to do a little research. It's important to find out how your brand will be perceived in other countries and regions, not just in other languages, but within your own language. So there are tremendous differences between UK and US English, and many of us, as American English speakers, are familiar. Cookie versus biscuit, you can figure out. Maybe you've never heard candy floss and would be surprised to hear that that's cotton candy. Elevator and lift were okay. But a British teacher here in the U.S. doesn't ask her students, or if she were to ask her students to take out their rubbers, there would be a whole lot of giggling and shock in the classroom. For those that don't know, that's the conduct. So, so language can be funny, but it can also get you into a lot of trouble. And here are some examples of products that are not well received in other countries. For example, Barf brand laundry detergent, not recommended outside of, I believe, Iran. La puta, the prostitute car, not recommended. And as Anita, who's from Germany, can attest, IKEA selling bunk beds with the name Budvik, definitely not recommended. So obviously, first and foremost, you have to know your audience. You have to spend some time. The internet loves these mistakes, so don't be another one of those mistakes that that people are writing about and sharing. You want the good media, not the bad. So if you build it, if you decide you're going to be translating your website, for example, they will come, but are you ready for it? So it's one thing to translate your website and your marketing materials, but do you then have the resources internally to respond to that audience? Do you have sales support in that language? Do you have customer service representatives? Do you have post-sales support? So what's going to happen after that content and after your product gets into the hands of speakers of other languages? Once you decide that you are going to translate, how are you going to do it, and who's going to do it? There are a number of approaches that organizations take, and they all have advantages and disadvantages. I'll start by talking about machine translation. Caesar, next slide, please. Machine translation has seen tremendous improvements in recent years, and it's a fantastic tool and a pinch for internal purposes or to get access to lots of content that you just need to read for informational purposes, but it's certainly not ready without a native speaker review that's looking for linguistic and cultural appropriateness. There's some examples of Google Translate gone bad. But translation agencies are starting to use it as a tool. Translators are using it as a tool, but it's not ready to just send it through and click print and distribute or put up on your website. In-house resources can be a fantastic option. Many organizations have native speakers working for them, and so they often have a very important role in the translation process. But it's essential to determine first and foremost, are they native speakers? Were they educated in the country so they're familiar with the writing and orthographic norms? They may have grown up speaking the language and be very fluent, but do they know how to write and how to spell in a way that's going to be appropriate? Do they have the industry and the regional expertise? Are they good writers in general? And then, only then, do they have translation skills? But if you are using in-house resources, it's absolutely essential, as it is in no matter who you're using, to have a second set of eyes to edit and proofread. You would never publish a website without having somebody else use it or somebody else review it, even if you're an English speaker. So you want to make sure that your brand is in the hands of somebody who knows what they're doing. It's often thought to be a cost saver to have in-house resources do the translation, but who's doing their job when they're translating? So you have to think about the finances of it. It may be that an internal translator takes twice as long to do half as good of a job. And it may be that they do a wonderful job, but you just need to think critically before deciding that somebody with a last name that corresponds to the language where you're sending your product is the right person for this project. Freelance translators can also be a good option. They're lots and lots and lots of them. But you have to make sure in the same way that you're evaluating an internal resource, you have to evaluate their skills. You have to have a way of verifying their skills. Do they have the industry and the regional expertise? And you still need to have that second set of eyes to edit and proofread, no matter what, no matter who they are and what the qualifications are. But a bigger question here with freelancers is, do you have the time to be a project manager? Because it does take project management to identify the freelancers, coordinate, sending things back and forth, making sure they get to the editor, so that there's a time commitment to that process as well. Agencies, full disclosure and no surprise, I am an agency, but translation agencies bring a lot to the table. We do that legwork for you. We recruit native-speaking translators that are both linguistically and culturally aware of the implications of their language choices. They're experienced, and many of them are certified by certifying bodies such as the American Translators Association. They have access to CAT tools, which are computer-assisted translation tools that help maintain consistency and create efficiencies, not just across one project, but across your entire year and beyond of projects from the get-go and beyond. We work with editors that check for accuracy and polish. We have access to desktop publishing. So if you send us a file in InDesign, it will come back in InDesign ready to go. We had a situation where we translated some content for the Secretary of State here in Illinois into Korean in InDesign. It was all ready to go. We sent it off, and then after the fact, they decided to change the font. So they changed the font, and then they printed 50,000 copies and distributed it to the Korean community. And I got a call from someone who was very, very angry at the mistakes we had made and how upset the community was. And it turned out that the version we sent them was fine, but when they changed the font on their end, things got completely confused. They didn't send it back to us for review before printing, and 50,000 Korean community members were up in arms about the lack of respect shown for sending something so poorly done. And so you definitely don't want to be on the receiving end of those phone calls. No matter who you're using, what you're using, if you have made any changes after the fact, ask that translator or that agency to review before you publish or before you click and send. Agencies cover the project management from start to finish, and based on experience, we can anticipate issues like fonts in and after the fact editing, and also share best practices. If you do decide on an agency, thankfully there are lots of global chamber members that can help and would love the opportunity to talk to you about it. Regardless, again, of whether you use an agency or not, I mentioned before the importance or the possibility of using an internal resource. Internal resources are exceptionally beneficial, and especially if you have particular style guides, glossaries, terminologies, preferences. Agencies always want to know that before the fact, and if there's an internal speaker who can give that insight, that will help ensure that the product will be the way you want it to be on the outside or after the fact. And having one of your internal people review the content afterwards and then give feedback to the agency is a crucial step. And so we absolutely want to involve them when we can. And so the more you can provide at the start, the better the outcome is going to be. So glossaries, examples of preferences and of translations you've done in the past, all that makes for a better product after the fact. And lastly, translation is more than a transaction. It's really about relationships. So whoever you wind up using and whatever approach you take, plan on it being a long-term relationship, obviously in an ideal world, and spend the time, develop that relationship, help the agency or the translators understand what goals you're trying to accomplish, and let that be a partnership together. It truly is about relationships. And that was very quick, but I really want to thank the Global Chamber for helping foster those relationships among all of us. It's such an important part to us as we work on bringing our business globally. So thank you very much.
Jill. Thank you, Jill. Really appreciate that. One question that came in, like the font change, that seems like it's, who would think that, right? If changing the font would actually change. How did that happen? Was it Korean characters were converted over into other things?
Yes, and it doesn't always happen, but obviously with character-based languages, you just have to be much more careful. Right to left languages, things can get flipped, and so when it's a Latin character-based language, it's easier to do your own final check and feel relatively confident that everything looks the way it's supposed to. But if it's in Korean, if it's in Hebrew or Arabic, if it's in Hindi, you have no way of verifying are things in the right place. So always having somebody check to make sure, whether it's on a website or a document that you've just published, have that native speaker review it to make sure that nothing was missed and nothing got messed up along the way.
Okay, kind of, and I'd like to include Miguel on this question. Question regarding how does just a normal person get up to speed in these areas? And let's start on the cultural side. You know, the Global Chamber members typically are knowledgeable about global business, but you know, there's so many different languages and cultures and different things out there. You can't, no one person can possibly know everything. So it's two-part question. One is, and either of you please answer this, or Tim, you know, how does a Globie, somebody who's sensitive to this, get up to speed on kind of doing day-to-day business and is sensitive to it, number one. And number two is, invariably we work with people who are less experienced and maybe coming up, and they're diligent and they want to do the right thing. How would we recommend they get up to speed to hopefully be more successful, but also make fewer mistakes? Miguel or Jill or Tim? Any ideas? What would you suggest?
I'll go ahead and speak up. I would say, first of all, you just have to kind of, you know, I've been around the world in about 47 countries, and all those experiences are different. You just, when you're out there engaging with your clients and whoever it is, you have to be kind of sense and aware that things may be different. And so you can actually learn a lot of them just by talking to people. I can remember in India, the first time I asked whether or not I'd given an appropriate tip, and I had the head shaking, it kind of went waving like this, and I didn't know if that was yes or no or what, and you know, I had to learn that was a different way of saying, yeah, it's okay, you know, kind of thing. And so it's just being aware and then asking questions. There are some things, though, that you just are never going to know, and when it comes to even legal things like you mentioned earlier on, you really just need to have some expertise. You need to have some people that have had that world experience and know what's going on in those situations if you really to stay on top of it. Just understand that we really can't comprehend, I think, all of those experiences. I've worked with 85 languages and been on the ground in 47 countries, and I still feel like I'm a naivete on this stuff. So.
Gotcha. Yeah. Really good point. I think flexibility and resiliency, you know, hard like water, that concept of recognizing you can't possibly know everything, but whether it's the example that you gave, you made me think of one where I was taking a video of a temple in India, and you're not supposed to do that. But, you know, I didn't know, and the guy took my camera, and, you know, and it was turned into a potentially international incident with somebody being jailed. And so being, you know, cool and calm and collected in moments of tension. You know, another example is, you know, it's still done somewhat where if you're in a Japanese meeting, they can keep the doors closed and smoke and very hot. And so it basically kind of smokes you out, right? And puts pressure on you, you know, somewhat intentionally. No question it's intentional, and to put pressure on you to make mistakes. And so, you know, being cool, calm, and collected and responding when you make a mistake and apologizing. There's no sin in saying I'm sorry, right? I mean, that's one of the things we've heard in politics is, oh, it's the apology tour. Well, you know, guess what? You know, whether it's in politics or whether it's inter-country or whether it's inter-business, apologies go a long way. So to your point, Tim, you can't know possibly everything, so you have to apologize. So spending time apologizing is probably good time spent. Miguel, sorry, I think you were saying something.
What I'm saying is that in my past life, when I was working in corporate, I was responsible for all the international employees, and what we had was a program which is for those employees that were about to be sent to international. One of them was a program that we have in cultural sensitivity, and when we move those employees to the host country, we assign a mentor there. A mentor that was responsible to help him to navigate not only in the new organization, but also in the new culture. That's what we did it. Additionally, when I was working in Kellogg, we partnered with Thunderbird and an international program for international employees. When I was based in Paris, France, we partnered with INSEAD to put together a program for employees coming coming into a different geographies. We took very, very seriously the transfer of employees to a different country, because it's not only the employee, it's the family as well. And the employee, they have a place to go in the workplace, but the family stays. So it's not only the employee, but also the family. And I said, we have an internal program, we have an external training, and we have a mentoring program that was responsibility of the host country.
Fantastic. And we started to hear you. For some reason, when you started, we couldn't hear you here, but it sounds like we heard you around the world. And you finished very strong, so thank you very much. I apologize.
No problem.
So our next speaker is Tim, and Tim, we've already seen you, so that's cool. You're calling in from Salt Lake City. Jill talked about that people want to hear things in my language, and you actually work for inWhatLanguage in Salt Lake City, and you're going to be talking, building kind of on the conversation by talking about evaluating technology and challenges with video translation. Thank you, Tim.
Excellent. Thank you. Caesar, if you want to go ahead and throw the slides up, that'd be great. Just a little back. Let me go ahead and go to the next slide for the sake of time. We're kind of short here, Cesar. Looks like others might need to mute. I'm hearing a little back echo there, but a little bit about our company. That's me on the right there. Of course, you can see me on the camera too. I just want to bring up a little bit about our company. We're basically an enterprise level translation services company. We handle everything from software to websites to legal to even disciplines like e-learning, medical. We do movies. We do it all. And so a company can come in and be assured that their entire brand across all forms of communication work for them. So this little picture down below is a school that's just a few blocks from us. We have a mission here. We take 1% of our revenues each year, and we reinvest that by giving free translation services to in organizations like World Health Organization when there's an epidemic or a disease outbreak someplace, trying to make sure the communication is good to help people around the world. This is a situation where we went to a local school here. There are 60 languages spoken at that school just a few blocks from our office. And we went over there for a day of doing vision tests for the children who qualify for free glasses. Their parents, of course, don't speak English, so we translated all of the material that would have to go home to the parents so the parents could know, say, I would like my children to have free glasses, thanks for checking. So we were able to do that. We try to do quite a few different events. We get out as a company and have a lot of fun. This is just some of our people that were actually at the event over there. And their cafeteria just loaded with flags because there were people from all over the world. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, Cesar. What I wanted to talk a little bit about is watching out for what to do in video translation. We live in a world now, you see that new iPhone there in the middle, where people carry in their pockets technology that is roughly 7 times what IBM's main computer was when it beat the great chess player. It's in their pocket. And the cameras and everything. And the interesting thing is our world is turning more and more to video as opposed to documents and even websites. And so it's like I wanted to change the alternator on my wife's minivan the other day. I used to go look at a manual and I would follow it along and I would change it out. Now I just pull it up on my phone, I search YouTube and find somebody showing me exactly how to do it as I'm working along. And more of our world is moving that way. But when translating video, there's a lot of things you have to be careful of. First of all, the players themselves, you look at this top thing that says subtitle selection here, you have to have a player that will allow you to go into multiple languages. Not all players do. And interesting enough, unlike documents, we handle like 64 different file types in our system. The video side of it, there's like 300 file types out there. So codexes going in and out can be quite complex and stuff. And voiceover work in a studio is extremely expensive. The challenge with voiceover, though, is it's not all about just getting an exact translation because you have the medium being the video and having a certain amount of time. And you don't want to have your translation done and somebody reads it all or basically says it all and the audio goes for 5 more minutes than the video did. It's got to be matched up at the timing of the video. And since some languages have what we call a text gain, which now some languages, you go from English to Chinese, it'll have less text in the same space. But if you go from English to, say, Spanish and some Latin American languages and others around the world, it'll have text gain as much as 25%. And so more text has to be had there, or more syllables have to be said, and you got to fit them in a time frame, and you don't want it to sound too fast. The other problem you have is that on this down here on the bottom left, you see there's the transcription or the subtitles is actually over the top of other text that's on the screen. So embedding text in your videos can cause challenges unless that text can also be translated, and or you have the ability through players to move that subtitle or closed caption up and say the right corner or someplace else. You also have the problem that's not uncommon is that some people use the wrong things to translate. It can, Hayat, what are you going alone at this hour at home? You're going to stay tonight with us. I mean, it can come across really bad if those translations are not giving a colloquial way of saying things instead of being somewhat more literal. And you have situations like this example down here with Japanese, where some people in a cultural setting where they maybe don't read the Japanese characters well, they would like some transliteration or sound of those things. Or where they don't break the captions up and the whole caption covers the whole screen. There can be a lot of different challenges that can be facing you there. First of all, I'd like to just, let's go ahead and go to the next slide there. Let's talk about some of the technology. And there are technology out there that you can do. Transcription is often done in one software, and then somebody creates subtitles in another software, and then they go to their translation software to translate the subtitles, and then they go back to another software to build the video at the end. There are media translation systems like this one that I'm showing you here where you can get in and do all of those things, all four in one system instead of four different systems. So this has a system where the transcription is automatically brought in, and it's done actually automated through, in this case, we use IBM Watson for this. It brings it in, and it gives us a pretty good accurate translation in several languages and dialects. And then we clean it up with a human to make sure it's accurate. And then the translation is provided here too. Some of the challenges of translating video too is that these captions, you see the caption is nice and short over here, which is in relation to this first part that was before this break in the sentence, and there's another break here. Some systems will add those breaks based on a sound wave. You'll have a sound wave over here, and you'll have to put the start and stop, and it can be very complex to do and add a lot to the time. So if you can get something that actually allows you to put the breaks where you want, just drag it to the right or left to make it look the way you want, it's much better. The other things too, be able to have an automated divide caption. Just give it a number of character links, just click, and the entire document is divided up so none of the characters are to it. And then having the ability to actually play it in real time. This has a player on it that they can play, and this is just a screenshot here. It even has sounds. They can even record their sounds right in here and then have that recording go right into the video when it's done. So there's a lot of tools out there. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide there, Cesar. We're short on time here, so I'm going to try to be quick. So there's the old ways of doing a manual transcription, which can be very expensive, and there's automated transcription. You can translate by segment fragments or whole sentences. Whole sentences are always better. For instance, everybody knows how Yoda talks with his verbs at the end of the sentence. Well, Japanese does the same thing. And if you have a very long sentence and the verbs at the end, the pieces, the fragments won't actually match up very well, and it can look very odd when you're trying to, as a translator, translating sentences in fragments as opposed to whole sentences. Likewise, if you don't have whole sentences and those segments don't match up, you can't have what we call translation memory. Jill did a great job of talking about some of the things out there, and I'm sure in her company with these CAT tools, she's got translation memory, which is basically that if a translation of a sentence is already done, you can get it again for free. The technology will put it in there so you don't have to pay for that translation more than once. Last year, on average, our clients saved 19% of their cost of translation was reusable translation memory. And we have one client that had as much as 41% of their content they didn't have to pay for because of translation memory. And that can only happen if you're translating whole sentences and not sentence fragments. Sound wave parsing as opposed to text-based. I mentioned that over there a second ago. Manual and automated caption, working in one instead of four systems, or the ability to do machine voice on that. And I don't have time to show that, but we've got machine voices now that include inflection and tone and stuff. We take them to conferences and we show these voices, and they are literally, we put them head to head with human translation, human voices, and people get it wrong 50% of the time, which one's the computer, which one's the machine. They're that good. So you can save quite a bit of money on those things too. There's a short video So we've got a short video. It's 90 seconds. It's just talking a little bit about e-learning, one of those areas we do. If you just want to show that short video, and then I'll kind of close it up here. So.
As business expands into global markets, more and more companies will have a need for their e-learning courses to include multiple languages. So they have two choices. Companies can either take that burden and scramble to translate the course using outdated and manual methods, or they can partner with inWhatLanguage and avoid the problem altogether. Whether you create courses in Adobe Captivate, Articulate Storyline, or custom authoring tools, we can easily export your files, translate them, and re-upload them with proper formatting. To make sure you have success with your multilingual e-learning courses, here are some simple tips to ensure translation excellence. Step 1. Make sure the content is properly internationalized. For instance, workplace safety regulations are very country-specific. There's no OSHA in France, but they do have other similar organizations. Step 2. Use graphics instead of words when possible. But when you do use graphic elements, make sure they're internationally recognizable. Step 3. Voice narration is cheaper and easier to produce compared to dubbing a person on screen. Not having a person on screen makes it much easier to switch voices for areas sensitive to gender. Step 4. Be mindful of color schemes. For instance, in the US, green represents positive growth in finances, but in Japan it's the exact opposite and red actually indicates positive growth. Now there are many more tips we could share, but you'll just have to meet our team to hear the rest. They want to meet you and personally help as much as possible based on your specific global e-learning needs. Now you can rest easy, knowing you have a trusted e-learning language service provider to handle any of your multilingual content.
Okay, thank you. I'll just open it up for questions, where we want to go next. So.
Okay, I think in terms of questions, I think you're all wrapped up, Tim?
I'm good. Yes, thank you.
Okay, very good. So we're having a little hard time hearing. Maybe it's coming out of segue from slides and things like that. So does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask? One question I see coming, what you've described here, Tim, looks like it's something that would be helpful for not just videos, but for like multiple marketing materials. I mean, is this something that you would use like when you're trying to coordinate a campaign that would include emails and brochures and other online content?
That is correct. It will handle all of those things and much more, right down to the software. So.
Okay. How does what you guys have differ from other things that other people might be aware of?
Well, you know, and I'm trying not to make this so much sales. I'm a CTO. I'm not a sales guy, so I hope this doesn't come across that way. But we built our own system. We don't use, you know, we call it unified, but it literally does everything from software to websites to video, and we use the same translation memories across all of those things and the resources and assets. So it's something that's kind of proprietary to us. So.
Okay, that sounds good. I'm, at least on our end here at headquarters, I'm showing the main speakers. Unfortunately, Natalia was not able to attend today because of a personal issue. And I talked to her this morning, and she will be involved in events later on. She's out of the Washington, D.C. area. So Jill, thank you so much for your knowledge and information today. Miguel, thank you. And Tim, thank you. What we'll be doing is posting this video up on the, presuming it came out, and it should, we'll be posting some keynotes from this session and any follow-up questions. If anybody has a question and they're too shy to ask it, send it in to info@globalchamber.org, and we'll be happy to address that. If you have any, if you want to reach out to any of the speakers, the information is linked in the event, and if you have any trouble with that, also send it to info@globalchamber.org, and we'll be happy to direct it to the appropriate people. and address any other questions that you might have. Our next event is actually 2 weeks from today. When I say event, our next Globinar is in 2 weeks. It's about setting up operations overseas. I think it's actually a very well attended already event that's got a lot of people signed up. It's got events on the ground in multiple locations, and check your local chapter for other events that might be coming up. Here at headquarters in Metro Phoenix, our big event in January is next Tuesday, the International State of the Metro. Thank you, everybody, for participating around the world. Thank you, speakers. You did a great job, and we'll be in touch with you. Watch for the blog post. Thank you very much.